And there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to Thanksgiving week on Cowboy State Politics. From very high above all the puerile and insipid bombastic twits in the Wyoming mainstream media, this is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Thanksgiving week. It is, I can really hardly believe it's Thanksgiving, and I guess it's just a combination of being so incredibly busy this year, the election and getting married and building a salon and all of that. I guess the whole year just kind of flew by, but it is Thanksgiving, Thanksgiving week anyway. And so we're going to do some things that are a little bit different on the program, and just to kind of give you a roadmap of how the next couple of days is going to go. Of course, today we're going to be on the radio, and then tomorrow we'll also have a live program. Thursday, sorry, you're on your own. You go hang out with your family. And try not to get into gigantic arguments about politics, though. I understand you really can't control all that. But Thursday, go spend time with your family. Friday, do the same thing. And then we'll be back with a full schedule next week on Tuesday. Now, if you didn't catch the Cowboy State Politics podcast, I suggest that you go listen to yesterday's program. It was a deep dive into what's happening in the Wyoming Senate, what transpired with that vote, why it happened the way that it has, and what you can expect going forward. And I guess the central point is, what did Bo Beitman and Tim Salazar have to give up to be elected president and vice president of the Senate? Because in my not so humble opinion, it wasn't just the majority floor leader position. I really don't think that was enough to get 13 redcoats to vote for him, because that's what it took. 13 rhino redcoats for Bo Beitman to take the center seat, which tells you a lot. I mean, if he couldn't have possibly gotten elected with conservative votes and he had to rely on the redcoats, well, that might be a little concerning from the very beginning. So go check out the podcast. It's chock full of a whole bunch of crazy stuff that Aaron Dorr has said. Aaron Dorr of Wyoming Gun Owners. Of course, they were ecstatic, but they fundamentally misunderstand just about everything about politics in Wyoming. So anyway, go check out the podcast. On today's program, we're just going to kind of bounce around. I've got some interesting articles for you. We're going to do a little bit of history later on in today's program. It's an anniversary of the communists, so we should probably take a look at how communism has moved in this country, and it's got a long and storied history here. So probably in the second half of the program, we'll talk about that. On tomorrow's show, the real story of Thanksgiving, a Cowboy State Politics tradition that I started the very first season. So Actually, Cowboy State Politics started on December 3rd of 2020, so it was after Thanksgiving. So didn't do a Thanksgiving Day special, then. But the following year, in 2021, that's when we started the real story of Thanksgiving on the program. And I tell it every year, and it's the things that you don't know about Thanksgiving and why it is the exact opposite of what is taught in schools, what teachers want to tell their little children, their little students, to make them believe that, we're a different country than we were, and that's just not the case. The real story of Thanksgiving is really revealing, and so we're going to do that tomorrow, both on the podcast and on the live program. But this morning, there's a couple of great stories coming out of Wyoming. Well, first of all, let's start with Thanksgiving. If you're watching the Ditto Cam, you can see on the gigantic chalkboard, which is not so gigantic. Number one on the thing: Trump will save Thanksgiving next year. Trump doesn't have anything to do with Thanksgiving this year. And I hope that you've paid attention to the grocery bill when you've gone and got your Thanksgiving Day supplies and, the cranberries and the pumpkin pie and, everything to make all of your Thanksgiving Day goodies. I hope you paid attention to the amount of cash you forked over, because that is a direct reflection of all of the policies of the Biden administration. And in fact, according to Breitbart News this morning, the cost of the holiday feast, the cost of Thanksgiving, is up 24% over Biden, under Biden. And I quote, Thanksgiving dinner will cost a staggering 24% more this year than it did before Joe Biden took office. A dinner for 10 featuring 12 traditional dishes like turkey, stuffing, cranberries, pumpkin pie will average about $58.05, according to an annual survey by the American Farm Bureau Federation. That's up from $46.90 in the last Thanksgiving of Donald Trump's first term. The price of a 16-pound turkey is $25.67 on average this year, up 32% from the pre-Biden inflation Thanksgiving of 2020. Quote, while consumers are getting a much needed relief after years of elevated retail prices, these grocery bills also reflect some hard conversations around the dinner table for farm and ranch families, American Farm Bureau said. Many prices are actually down a bit from last year, according to the Farm Bureau. The overall price of a holiday feast for 10 is down about 5%, but even that drop in prices isn't enough to erase the financial squeeze of years of runaway prices. Quote, consumers are exhausted from years of inflation, and it will take more than the past 2 years' improvements to erase the pain. Now, this is an economic concept that I don't think a lot of people understand, because we tend to judge how well the economy is doing by the price at the gas pump. Now, that's a direct reflection of what's happening in the economy, but that's kind of the short-term thing. The prices, you might go to the gas pump one day. I think the day before the election, it was well over $3 here in Sheridan, and then a couple days later, it was down to $2.60. So, yes, that's a reaction to the election, but it's short term, right? Because oil, crude, is traded on futures. There's estimating going on how much production there's going to be in the near term and the far term. So gas prices, not really a good gauge of how the economy is doing, though, bigger picture, I guess, yeah. The Biden-Harris administration has caused gas prices to be, on average, around $3 the entire presidency. So, that's a pretty good indication that they suck at economics. A better gauge of how the economy is doing comes at the grocery store. When you have rampant inflation, it affects those goods, durable goods, and commodities and consumables in a different way than it does fuel prices. So when you look at the price of bread, the price of milk, the price of eggs, your turkey, those are all a direct reflection of what's happening in the economy to a greater degree. Now, we live in Wyoming, and this is why I brought this up, because here we tend to have a couple of month lag between what's happening in the broader economy to when it affects us. So what you're seeing right now is a reflection of what happened last year and the year before. And this is a bit of caution here, because conservatives, we tend to look at Trump's win in the election as, woohoo, we won, Trump's going to be our savior, everything's going to be great, it's going to go back to normal. But that's not exactly true, because there's a lot of cleanup on aisle 5 to be done. And it's not going to happen overnight. And so you're not going to see the results of that happen overnight either. You just need to be aware and prepare for the future. That if you're struggling today, I would expect that things would get markedly better in a couple of years, but you still need to prepare. And for conservatives, we can't sit back and just let Trump handle everything, because that's what we did last time. Trump got elected. We thought we were great. All of us sat back and we didn't do anything. And then all of a sudden, the Democrats took over. Now, I still say that the 2020 election was rigged. I don't think that it was a fair fight. I agree with Harriet Hageman that it was rigged in a number of different ways. I watched the movie 2000 Mules. I'm positive that there was ballot stuffing going on. That's why they were, stopping counting so they could wait for ballots to be delivered. So all of that. But anyway, we can't sit back and we can't think that Trump is going to save us all. It's awesome that he got elected. But we have to be on our toes too. We have to make sure that we are pushing forth a conservative agenda in our state. By the way, we just had real leadership elections in our state legislature, and they didn't exactly turn out all rainbows and lollipops for us. One whole chamber was the presidency was gained by playing patty cake with one of the biggest redcoats in the Wyoming Senate. So you can just imagine how that's going to turn out for us. The House of Representatives, I think, is more solid. Conservatives took solid control over that chamber, but there's a lot to do there. And locally, there's a lot of things that happen too. A lot of races changed hands, and so we've got a lot of work to do, and we can't just sit back. Now, while Thursday is Thanksgiving, yes, you should sit back and celebrate. Be thankful for everything that we have. Be thankful that we live in this amazing country. Be thankful that our fellow countrymen didn't elect Kamala Harris to the presidency. Be very, very thankful for that. By the way, and I'm way off topic here, but let me just run down some numbers here. Price increases for Thanksgiving. Pumpkin pie is up 22.4%. A gallon of milk is up 4.2%. Carrots and celery, something you don't think about, 15%. Pie shells, 40% increase. Things you get in the freezer so you don't have to make your pie shell from scratch. Green peas, not one of my favorite Thanksgiving Day dishes, but they're up 18.5%. Whipped cream, 4.4%. And cubed stuffing, not another one of my favorites. I do like the taste of it, but being a diabetic, I've gotten away from eating stuffing and mashed potatoes. But cubed stuffing is up 45.2% this year. The only items on the Farm Bureau's Thanksgiving feast menu that have not gone up in price since 4 years ago are cranberries and sweet potatoes. Two of my favorites. Thank God we're not going to be losing money on those. So anyway, Thanksgiving, it's going to cost you a little bit more. And the point of this is it's probably going to cost you about the same next year too, because, we're still suffering the effects of Joe Biden and his Build Back Broker campaign. There's a new report out from the University of Wyoming, and we actually covered this on the morning show about 2 weeks ago. But it's actually come out a little bit more broadly now. This comes from K2Radio.com, and the title of the article is Wyoming Sees Mixed Economic Forecast for 2025. Report finds. Okay, so this is not exactly a reflection of what I just talked about. Not at all. In fact, a lot of this economic report is kind of fantasy. Oh, and I just looked down at the clock. So we're going to go ahead and take a break. And then when we come back, we'll talk about the flawed report coming out of the University of Wyoming. Of course, the people that ran the report, they're not fans of Donald Trump. So why would they include that in any of their analysis? They wouldn't. They want you to think it's as bad as they think it is. More after the break. You can listen to Cowboy State Politics live every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. on the Independence Network. Make sure that you subscribe and follow the Cowboy State Politics podcast. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. That way, you'll make sure that you won't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics. Cowboy State Politics is sponsored by FreedomGoldUSA.com. They are the working man's gold company. The economy is in turmoil. The stock market pretty much is out of control, and you never know what's going to happen with your finances or your income. One way that you can shore up everything is by investing in gold and silver. Go to freedomgoldusa.com/David for a free interview to discuss your options and find out if gold or silver is right for you. One more time, that's freedomgoldusa.com/David. Welcome back to the program, my friends. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics live on Facebook, on X, on YouTube, on Rumble, pretty much anywhere that you want to find me. Cowboy State Politics is Wyoming's most listened to conservative program, documented to be almost always right 89% of the time. And judging from the last couple of episodes on the podcast talking about these Senate elections, I should be able to bump that number way up. That was a big one to be right about, because everybody in the Wyoming media and Wyoming political circles said I was totally making it up, that there's no way Bo Beitman would cut a deal with Senator Slithers to become the Senate president. Well, that's exactly what he did, my friends. This program have been totally vindicated, because that is exactly what happened. And the only thing that we have to look at now is how big of a deal did he cut? Because I personally don't think that the majority floor leader position, though, that's huge. That's a big deal. I don't think that was enough for them, for all 13 of those redcoats. And we're talking about people like Nancy Case, Eric Barlow, Barry Crago, solid dyed-in-the-wool redcoats. There's no way that they would vote for a conservative if there wasn't something big on the tables. And we just don't know what that something big was, in addition to majority floor leader position. So we don't really know that. Anyway, stay paying attention to the podcast. I've been talking about that a lot lately. In fact, on yesterday's installment of the show, it's a pretty deep dive. And there's some pretty fantastic quotes by Wyoming gun owners, which, by the way, Wyoming gun owners is not even headquartered in Wyoming. It's just like the Pravda on the Platte. Their head guy, Aaron Dorr, he lives in New York. Their corporate offices in Wyoming is actually a post office box at a UPS store in Cheyenne. So don't pay any attention to what they have to say. Well, there's a report out from the University of Wyoming, and they're saying that the economic forecast for 2025 is not all that great. Let me just read a couple of these paragraphs to you, and I quote: Wyoming's economic outlook is mixed for 2025, with a continuing decline in the coal industry, shortages in housing and childcare, and an aging population clouding the state's mid- and long-term growth prospects, according to a new University of Wyoming report. The Center for Business and Economic Analysis in UW's College of Business issued its second annual Wyoming Economic Forecast in conjunction with the Governor's Business Forum. Quote, "The year ahead for Wyoming holds many opportunities and challenges, including finding solutions to current binding constraints for growth, housing affordability for workers, challenging transportation and connectivity resulting in constrained access to markets, a thin and complex labor market, and the brain drain in our higher education graduates, among others," the report reads. Still, the report predicts a slight increase in the state's labor force in 2025, with just a small increase in the unemployment rate to 3.2%. lower than the national rate. The state's population is also expected to increase slightly. Now, one fascinating thing about this report is they don't take into account the reality of politics. They don't take into account who is in charge of the Wyoming legislature and who is in charge at the federal level. Of course, when this report came out, I don't think the election had happened yet, or if it did, it was like right after the election. But let's just kind of run through a couple of these things. First of all, they say the continuing decline in the coal industry. Well, I mean, that's a direct result of the Biden-Harris administration's push towards renewable energy. And with Trump in the Oval Office, that ain't going to happen anymore. Of course, renewable energy can be part of the portfolio, but you can't disregard our traditional extractive industries in favor of an unproven and unreliable technology, wind turbines and solar panels and all of that. There was a story out last week where there's a wind farm, which I always found that term to be kind of interesting, wind farm. But anyway, how there hasn't been a single one of those wind turbine blades turn in like 7 years or something, like 10 years. So they've just been sitting there idle because a lot of people made a lot of money building the darn things, and they realize that there is no return on investment. So they got a lot of money, probably in subsidies, and now there's no reason to even turn them on. So anyway, I think that you can expect our extractive industries to explode under the Trump administration when he moves us back to energy independence. Coal, oil, natural gas, they're all going to go through the roof. So, I mean, I think that's one big place where this report is extraordinarily flawed. The second one, shortages in housing and childcare. So really, those two things, now housing does play a big part in the economy. Yeah, I mean, if you want people to work at your jobs, at your factory, at your business, well, you got to have a place for them to live. But I think that and one of the reasons they list this is there's been a big push lately for what so-called affordable housing. Anytime you hear that phrase, affordable housing, you think government subsidies, government rent controlled. Tenements was, an old term for it. Projects is another one. But the truth is, whenever the government gets involved, you have crappy housing, not affordable housing. You have crappy housing. A good friend of mine refers to affordable housing developments as rabbit cages. Giant buildings with a whole bunch of little tiny apartments in them. And here's the other thing. Even if those facilities get built, they're not going to be maintained, because if you don't have a solid buy-in in it, and that is, if you don't have any skin in the game, you're not going to take care of it. Why would you? You don't have any reason to take care of that property. You didn't have to buy it. You didn't have to repair it. Why should you even take care of it? Secondly, it's subsidized. So anytime the federal government or the state government or local government, for that matter, gets involved in anything, you're picking winners and losers. You're artificially depressing part of the market in favor of government. And if you want to know why, quote unquote, affordable housing hasn't been built, it's because you've been playing around in the free market, because you've allowed government to take over that sector of production. So there's no reason why a private company would come along and build such a thing, because there's no money in it. They can't build it at the price that with government. You see, if you have government subsidies, whomever the contractor is or the developer is that's building those things, they're getting money from the government, and so it's not costing them as much money to build. So there's no reason why a private developer would come along and build one on their own. Rather, if you want affordable housing, you have to get out of the way of the free market. If there's a big business that wants to move into any Wyoming town, any place in Wyoming, they're going to have workers. And so if it is economically feasible for them to move here, it will most likely be economically feasible for them to build here. Also, you need to allow companies to operate on their own. If they need workers, they'll import them if they want to bring their business here. Now, the second constraint, and this is probably more what UW should have drilled down on, is as Wyoming's low population. There's not a lot of people that live here. There's only a little over 500,000 people in the entire state. It's the lowest populated state in the country. And so you can't expect a gigantic factory to come to be built here simply because there aren't enough people to work in it. So unless you can convince a whole bunch of people to move to a place where it snows 9 months out of the year, or 8 or 9 months, whatever the case may be, you're not going to move your business here. So that is just a nature. I mean, that's just a function of where we live. It's really nothing that changes all that much. And for the University of Wyoming to include that in their economic report just exposes the flawed reasoning that they're using. Let's go to child care and an aging population. That's something that it has been continual, so it's not something that changes. So I don't know that there's anything that you could point to say, oh, well, that's contributing to the economy. Well, yeah, but it always has been. So it's not a significant factor in any changes that are going to happen in 2025. So why include it in your report? It's not significant in any changes. Let's see here. And then the next thing they had, let's see here, connectivity and here we go. Challenging transportation and connectivity resulting in constrained access to markets. Well, that's again always been the case in Wyoming. Anything that you bring into the state has to be trucked here, and anything that leaves the state has to be trucked out. But that's no different than any other of the landlocked states in the country. So again, I don't know why that you would include that, unless, of course, there's going to be some sort of huge advancement in connectivity. And that's another example. I love this. That's another example of how the government has been playing around in the free market too much. One of the ways that many people who now are no longer in the Wyoming legislature got enormously wealthy is by playing around in broadband access. A couple of years ago, sitting in the gallery of the legislature, you would hear the terms rural broadband all the time. There are several different bills a year that happen, and it is because a lot of the people in the legislature were making a crap load of money off of it, namely Albert Sommers. So, a lot of this economic report is a bunch of bullcrap. Let's just now they do list some positive signs for the economy, and let me just run through some of those. Employment in natural resources and mining is expected to rise. The continuing decline in employment, wages, and the coal. Okay, so they're already saying that there's going to be more unemployment in Wyoming in the next year. I think that the truth is absolutely the reverse, that with Trump in office, companies are going to be more willing to build out. They're going to add on. They're going to hire more people simply because the environment is going to be more favorable to business. And because the UW report didn't list anything about Trump's election or anything about the favorable political atmosphere, because they don't see it as favorable, because this report is written by a bunch of Democrats and left-leaning UW professors. So they're not going to include that as a favorable contributing factor in the economic climate, though it absolutely is. And so I think when you look at this whole thing, you can do one thing with it. Throw it in the trash can. Moving on. Another great story. Now, they say this one's out of Wyoming, but it's really not. This is one of those companies that's permitted in Wyoming. It's probably got its corporate office listed as 30 North Gould, but I think that this is a hilarious story. The CEO fires 90% of his staff for missing a morning meeting. He stands by his choice, as he should. If I've got employees that aren't going to play by the rules of the game, if they're not going to show up to meetings that I call them to, they don't deserve to be working for me, and I'm certainly not writing them a paycheck. And I quote, Baldvin Odson, CEO of a Wyoming-based musical instrument online storefront. So that's your first clue that it's not a headquartered in Wyoming storefront business that you can go to and pick up an instrument. It's all online. The Musicians Club fired 90% of its staff, 99 out of 110 employees and freelancers, via Slack message for missing just one morning meeting at 8:30 a.m. on Friday, November 15th. One former employee detailed the shocking event in a now deleted post on Reddit's mildly infuriating forum. Quote, I joined an internship, and an hour later, the entire team got fired, the original user wrote. Quote, for those of you who, and this is coming from the owner, the CEO, For those of you who did not show up to the morning meeting this morning, consider this your official notice. You're all fired. Odson wrote in the all-team Slack, quote, "You failed to do what you agreed to, you failed to complete your part of the contract, and you failed to show up for the meetings that you were supposed to attend and work for." Odson then instructed the group, who all work remotely, to sign out of all accounts, return any company property, and consider any contracts terminated. Quote, "I gave you an opportunity to make your life better, to work hard, and to grow. Yet, you have shown me that you don't take all of this seriously." Out of 110 people, only 11 were present for this morning's meeting. Those 11 get to stay. The rest of you are terminated. Get the F out of my business right now. Many workers fired from the Musicians Club were unpaid remote part-timers. Jobs are marketed towards classical music students looking for work experience. A job listing from earlier this year for an unpaid operations management role with the company received 51 applicants. The listings said the job would provide, quote, "in-depth understanding of e-commerce operations within a competitive market, practical experience in managing and optimizing online sales platforms, and, quote, a high potential for full-time paid conversion in 2025. The Musicians Club is essentially a lean startup. The former intern wrote on Reddit, adding that Odson's company relies on remote interns willing to work for free. So it's a strange company anyway. And so if they are unpaid interns, and it looks like the majority of his employees were, he really wasn't out anything because he wasn't paying them anything to begin with. And it's kind of a crappy business model, relying on people that don't want to work and so or don't get paid. I mean, there's been a couple of examples of that where, you have commission-based employment situations. A lot of media outlets work like this. You don't get a paycheck, but you do get paid when your article gets printed or when it, gets disseminated or syndicated. You make money that way. But it's really not a W-2 situation or W-4 or whatever you fill out when you get hired. But anyway, I think it's fascinating that he fired 90% of his staff for missing a morning meeting. I would too. And, we've got to get away from this treating jobs as if they come and go every day. They don't. You should have respect for the position you're given. You agreed to work for a certain amount of hours for a certain amount of money, and you should fulfill that agreement regardless. But more changes that are coming under the Trump administration. We'll be back in a minute. I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but it's hunting season. And one thing that you can be absolutely certain of is while you're tromping around in the boonies, at some point, it's going to snow. A lot. And you definitely want to make sure that you keep your feet nice and toasty warm. The best way that you can do that is to order a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. They are the warmest socks that I've ever put on my feet. To get you a pair, go to their website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. Wyoming is one of the most sought-after places to live. There's a lot of people that want to move to our great state. And if you're thinking about selling your house to one of them, you need a real estate agent that you can trust. That agent is Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She's lived in Jackson for almost 20 years and has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market. Last year, she sold almost $25 million worth of property. So if you're thinking of buying or selling, give Rebecca a call. Her phone number is 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the
Watch out. Cowboy State Politics is only going to get stronger. This program is only going to continue to expand. From every county in this state to every state in this country, it's Cowboy State Politics. And it is the most listened to political program in the state of Wyoming. Welcome back to the show, my friends. Thanksgiving week on Cowboy State Politics Live. We're gonna do things a little bit different this week, as I mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast. We've got 2 days. We're gonna do today and tomorrow, and of course, tomorrow on the show, as well as the podcast, is going to be the real story of Thanksgiving. You don't want to miss it. It's a classic, and there are a couple of episodes around the holidays that I absolutely love to do. I mean, I love to do all the episodes of Cowboy State Politics, but I really get a kick out of doing the Thanksgiving episode and the Christmas Eve episode and the Christmas episode. I mean, it really gives me a charge, and I hope that you join me tomorrow so that I can tell you the real story of Thanksgiving. I mean, it's one of my favorites, and when you dig into it, it is the exact opposite of what I'm about to talk about right here. Well, you know what? Let's just go ahead and do it. So on January 10th of 1963, there was a congressional hearing, and it was the guy on the hot seat was named Cleo Skousen, and he was an avowed member of the communists of the Communist Party in America. And he listed out the goals of the Communist Party USA, and there was 45 of them. I mean, the whole point was, what do we have to do to make America a communist country? And let me just read some of them to you. U.S. acceptance of coexistence as the only alternative to atomic war. So we have to tolerate injustice just for the sake of avoiding an atomic war. Develop the illusion that total disarmament by the United States would be a demonstration of moral strength. Now, where have we seen that? All over the place, right? All these, nuclear reduction treaties and all that. Permit free trade between all nations, regardless of communist affiliation and regardless of whether or not the items would be used for war. We're seeing that battle right now. Free trade versus tariffs. Tariffs are going to destroy everything. Yeah. Extension of long-term loans to Russia and other Soviet satellites. Provide American aid to all nations regardless of communist domination. Set up, grant recognition of Red China. Allow all Soviet satellites individual representation in the United Nations. Resist any attempt to outlaw the Communist Party. Do away with all loyalty oaths. Continue or capture one or both of the political parties in the United States. Now that's an interesting one. There's only one thing better than owning one political party. That's owning two. And for a long time in Wyoming, we've seen this, that it is the Redcoats who have been in charge of the Wyoming legislature for, the last 30, 40 years. The conservatives have never had a chance to govern. And all of those Redcoats, they're Republicans, but if you look at all the policies that they pass, decidedly leftist. Infiltrate the press. Get control of book review assignments, editorial writing, and policy-making decisions. Thank God the press just found out that they are not nearly as powerful as they were before. Well, the list goes on and on. And again, remember, this is 1963. And you would think that a lot of this stuff has passed. You would think that a lot of people are not paying attention to it and that it's not popular to be a communist anymore. But the truth is that those ideas have never really left. And they started way before 1963. In 1942, there was a guy named Stuart Chase, and he wrote a book called The Road We Are Traveling. Now, this one is fascinating to me because he's talking about, in the book, he's talking about something he calls System X. He doesn't have a definition of what this system is, but he calls it System X. And he lists, in the book, he lists a whole bunch of goals that we would have to accomplish in order to turn this country into System X. And it's probably some sort of, conglomeration, some sort of communist socialist soup. Now, interesting thing about Stuart Chase is he's the guy that came up with the term the New Deal. It wasn't FDR. It was Stuart Chase. Now, and he died in 1985. Now, let me just read you a little bit of his obituary that was published in the New York Times from November 15th, 1985. And I quote, Stuart Chase, an economist and member of FDR's Brain Trust, who coined the phrase a New Deal, died yesterday at his home in Redding, Connecticut. He was 97 years old. Mr. Chase, an outspoken advocate of government planning and intervention in the economy, was a prolific writer on economics, semantics, and a range of subjects covering the gamut of human experience. He was one of the last surviving members of a small group of advisors who helped Roosevelt shape the New Deal. His interest ranged from babies to bombs, from corporations to corpuscles, and from technology to the environment. He wrote about the beginnings of language, social and political institutions, and the organization of religion, science, economics, and the arts. During the 1960s, Mr. Chase was a strong advocate of the Great Society programs of Lyndon Baines Johnson. In 1961, he was part of a group of American intellectual leaders who went to the Soviet Union to seek better understanding between the world's two major nuclear rivals. He was, however, never too busy to appreciate what was immediately around him. He served on the town of Reading's Planning Commission from 1956 until his death. During the Depression, when he was writing a book every year, his main thesis was the inevitability of a planned economy. He used a New Deal as the title for the book that he published in 1932. Now, that book, and a lot of Stuart Chase's books never went anywhere. In fact, if you go to try to find a copy of the road we are traveling, it's actually pretty hard to find. I haven't looked for it for a while, but a couple of years ago, I went around different booksellers and on eBay and tried to find one, and they were extraordinarily expensive. Not because they're a great book, not because people want to read it, but because they're rare, and it's got the blueprint for what the communists, what the socialists, and what the Democrats want to do to this country. And so let me just read you, and I guess we should talk about System X for a minute, because that's what he refers to in this. And let me just quote, before I get to the reasons or the things that he says we have to do, let me just read you this sentence. Quote, from Stuart Chase's The Road We Are Traveling. We have something called X, which is displacing the system of free enterprise all over the world. If we do not know yet what we call it, we can at least describe its major characteristics. And then he goes on to list the characteristics of System X. And my guess is the system that he's talking about is more fascism than anything else. It is privately owned enterprise that is controlled by the government. And you'll hear the phrase all the time, a public-private partnership. Now, what that means is you are in bed, you are in business with the government. They're paying you extraordinary amounts of money to produce goods. Now, you still own the company, technically, I guess, but you don't make any decisions in that company. It is a public-private partnership. You got to follow the rules of the government. And so, and when you boil it all down, that's essentially what fascism is. When you have, government control of free enterprise, they don't own it, they just control it. Now, the difference between fascism and communism, they're two basically the same thing. They're basically radical socialists. The Nazi Party, the original fascists, they were the National Socialist Party. So let's not equivocate on terms here. They're all the same group of people. So communism is that the government owns the means of production. That's where we started with the list from 1963. Now let's go to, so let me just tell you what Stuart Chase said we had to do to get to System X and see if any of these sound familiar to you. Quote, a strong centralized government, an executive arm growing at the expense of the legislative and judicial arms. In some countries, power is consolidated in a dictator, issuing decrees. Control of banking, credit, and security exchanges by the government. The underwriting of employment by the government, either through armaments or public works. The underwriting of Social Security by the government. Now, at the time that Stuart Chase was writing this, Social Security didn't exist. That was one of the programs that FDR was going to put into place. Social Security by the government, old age pensions, mother's pensions, unemployment insurance, and the like. The underwriting of food, housing, and medical care by the government. The United States is already experimenting with providing these essentials. Other nations are far along down the road. the use of deficit spending as a technique to finance these underwritings, the abandonment of gold in favor of managed currencies, the control of foreign trade by the government with increasing emphasis on bilateral agreements and barter deals. Can you say the Paris Accords? That deals with climate, but it's essentially the exact same thing. Control of natural resources with increasing emphasis on self-sufficiency. Control of energy sources. Hydroelectric power, coal, petroleum, natural gas. Control of transportation, railway, highway, airway, waterways. Control of agricultural production, farm subsidies. Control of labor organizations, the enlistment of young men and women in youth corps devoted to health, discipline, community service, and ideologies consistent with these of the authorities. Heavy taxation with special emphasis on estates and income. And he ends this, not much taking over of property or industries in the old socialist sense. The formula appears to be control without ownership, fascism. It is interesting to recall the same formula used by the management of great corporations in depriving stockholders of power. And then the last one, state control of communications and propaganda. But it would be much better if you didn't have to own them. You could just tell them what to do. And then the media and the propagandists would do it themselves. So ask yourself, how many of those things have we actually accomplished? How many of those things have we done as a country? I think that you could probably put a check mark next to each and every one of them. But this has been going on for a very, very, very long time. Now, remember, he wrote The Road We Are Traveling in 1942, which was right at the beginning of the New Deal. So a lot of this stuff, he was telling FDR that you need to go ahead and do it. And then it has continued. Barack Obama, he did a lot of this. Joe Biden with the green energy agenda. I mean, it goes on and on. So to think that a lot of what the Biden-Harris administration has been doing has been just kind of haphazard, or it's an idea that they came up with, or that this is something new, that's absolutely not true. Communism, socialism, and the Democrat Party, they've been working on this for a very long time. And the sooner you recognize that this is a long-term plan, the sooner we can learn to fight against it. More after the break. You are listening to Cowboy State Politics Live on the Independence Network. You're not going to find a selection of better news, entertainment, and commentary than right here on the Independence Network, with great voices like Joey Carenti from Just Blame Joey, Ken Pendergraft from The Ramble-Roon, Tom Kelly from Wide Right Turn, and the lovely Christine from The Hair Affair. And of course, my program, Cowboy State Politics, Wyoming's most listened to political program. Also, don't forget to check out the articles section at the website, independencenetwork.us. It's loaded with op-eds, commentary, and news from all around the Cowboy State. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest place is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. That way, if your name is Joe Biden and you can't remember if you had your pudding today, well, I probably can't help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president. And now, back to our program. Welcome back to the program. David Iverson atop the Wyoming media. Far more listened to than the cow pie or anybody else around. It's Cowboy State Politics, and I'm your host, David Iverson, behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone. I don't know if you realize this or not, but, and I didn't pay any attention to this during the election because I don't listen to celebrities. I don't think that they have any sort of political knowledge that I need to take advantage of, and I don't really think that there's a whole bunch there. I think that they're paid to do a job, and they should just do it and shut the heck up. Now, I'm not saying they can't have an opinion. I'm just saying that I don't think that you should pay any attention to it or base any of your decision making on it. And the truth is, it looks like a majority of Americans, or a wide majority of Americans, feel exactly the same way. From Breitbart News this morning, a poll proves that a wide majority of Americans reject celebrity endorsements. And I quote, "A new poll shows that the vast majority of Americans are rejecting celebrity endorsements of political candidates, a blow to Democrats who have come to increasingly rely on Hollywood influencers to sway young voters and amplify left-wing talking points on social media." For the recent presidential election, a full 75% of survey respondents said the celebrity's endorsement of a candidate made no difference or not much of a difference on how they voted, according to the new Rasmussen poll released on Monday. Now, this is interesting, and it goes back to what I was telling you about before the break with the communists and Stuart Chase and the new, variation on an old theme in fascism. Because the Communist Party was heavily involved in Hollywood, in the Screen Actors Guild, and I mean that's one of the. If you watch the movie Reagan, they did a really nice job of depicting the involvement of the communists in SAG, in the Screen Actors Guild, in their union. I think they did a really nice job because I think that for the most part we kind of gloss over that. A lot of people knew that Ronald Reagan was fighting the communists in Hollywood, but I don't think that we really understand the extent to which the communists had involvement in Hollywood. And the interesting thing, and maybe it's just a parallel, maybe it's not, one begatting the other, but when you look at not all of the celebrities, but a vast majority of the celebrities, they came out and introduced the communist socialist Kamala Harris in the election. Now, I don't think that the Communist Party is as out in the open as they were in Hollywood before, but still, you cannot deny the amount of celebrities that endorsed Kamala Harris, and there could be a number of reasons for it. One, they're all a bunch of leftists, or two, they don't have any idea what they're talking about, or three, it's the same ideology that's been happening for a really long time. Surprisingly, respondents to this survey who identify as liberal were more likely than others to disregard the opinion of a celebrity, with a full 80% saying a Hollywood endorsement didn't sway their decision this election season. Among conservatives, that figure was 73%. The results come on the heels of Kamala Harris's loss to President-elect Donald Trump, and Harris actively courting Hollywood celebrities and other entertainment industry elites, even going so far as to spend tens of millions of dollars on pop concerts and promotional events like the Oprah Winfrey Town Hall live stream, for which Kamala Harris paid her at least $1 million. Billionaire and millionaire Hollywood elites have come out hard for Kamala Harris. Now, it's interesting. Just listen to the list of names and their net worth. Oprah Winfrey, she's worth about $3 billion. Taylor Swift, she's worth $1.6 billion. Tyler Perry, $1.4 billion. Bruce Springsteen, $1.2 billion. Arnold Schwarzenegger, he's on the lower end. He's only worth $1 billion. Beyonce, $800 million. George Clooney, $500 million. De Niro, $500 million. Barbra Streisand, $460 million. David Letterman, $400 million. The series of election eve concerts in key swing states cost the Harris campaign as much as $20 million, helping push the campaign into debt after it blew through a staggering $1 billion raised by donors, which, that amount in and of itself is incredible. And it just shows you that the Democrats believed that they could just buy an election, that if they had more money than the Trump team, if they were able to spend more money, and if they had more advertisements, and they had more celebrities on their side, and they threw more concerts, then they would get people to vote for them. They vastly underestimated the intelligence of the American public. Now, I'll admit, Americans make mistakes all along. I mean, we voted for Barack Obama. I didn't personally vote for Barack Obama, but a lot of people did. Elected him twice. We elected Joe Biden after an incredible economy. We believed a lot of the bull crap that was being floated around on the media about Donald Trump. But in the end, we corrected ourselves and we put the right guy back in office. As Winston Churchill said, that eventually Americans will do the right thing after they've exhausted every other possibility. And I mean, I guess in the end, yes, we do the right thing. And it's a rejection of this superficial, ephemeral view of the American people. The elites in this country, they don't believe that you have the smarts. They don't believe that you have the intelligence to make a good decision yourself, which is why they're in the party that they are. Think about all of the things that the left has told you that you have to do over the last, decade, really. Even when Trump was president the first time around, they tried to tell you what light bulb to install in your lights, what stove you have to buy, what refrigerator you have to have, what car you can drive. They tried to mandate that we're not going to sell any internal combustion engines. I mean, the list is long and exhaustive. And the truth is, the American people believe fundamentally in freedom and the freedom of choice. And when they're told you have to do this, you'll find that they absolutely reject that, especially when the message is coming from people who fundamentally don't understand the American experience, the experience of normal, everyday, average Americans like you and me. But I think that, this one is kind of one of those articles that's a no-brainer, and you can say, duh, to it. But it's worth pointing out that celebrities really didn't do anything in this election. And really, maybe the biggest thing that they did was, tank it for Kamala Harris. Prove it, push the message over the edge, and to say, hey, guys, if you're not paying attention, don't vote for this lady. Excuse me, I didn't mean to misuse the word lady. We've got about 3 minutes left in the program, and I want to end here. Let's actually go here. Yeah, this is the one I wanted. I'm not used to having my stack of stuff. I got a printer working in the studio, so I'm back to having my stack of stuff. I've missed it. But this last piece, and it comes to us from Breitbart. As Trump heads to the White House, Representative Burleson pushes plan to abolish the ATF. We're going to start here on tomorrow's program. Oh, by the way, we're going to do the Thanksgiving thing about the middle of the program. We'll get some news out of the way, and then we'll go to the Thanksgiving festivities. And I quote, with President-elect Donald Trump heading to the White House and Congress under Republican control, Representative Eric Burleson is pushing ahead with plans to abolish the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, commonly known as ATF. He said for several decades they've been a disaster agency, which has been violating the Second Amendment and every other constitutional right of American citizens for a very long time. If there is, and I don't know who's got the record here, who's the most destructive agency, whether it's the FBI or the ATF, but both of them are pretty terrible. But the ATF has a long history of killing people that won't go along with the Democrats' plans. Quote, Burleson wants a scenario in which states handle their own gun law enforcement without federal agencies breathing down their necks. The ATF issued numerous rules, again during the Biden-Harris administration, one of which criminalized owners of legally purchased AR pistol stabilizer braces. Another one of the ATF's rules declared that 80% complete firearm frames are firearms and therefore can only be acquired via background checks. And the list goes on and on. But tomorrow, we're going to start out talking about the ATF and guns. And I'm going to run down a quick, brief history of all the violations that the ATF has done to American citizens, how many people they've killed enforcing their absolutely tyrannical ideas about the Second Amendment. But we're going to do that tomorrow, among other things. And again, at the bottom of the hour, we'll do the real story of Thanksgiving. I can't tell you how excited I am, and I hope all of you join me for it. But for now, from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics. We'll see you tomorrow.